Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you're part of our journey. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and get ready for a story that will leave you thinking. And if you love inspiring tales, a like goes a long way. It's not for sale anymore. These words crushed the little boy's world as he stood transfixed before the storefront window. His small fingers pressed against the cold glass, leaving foggy prints around the outline of the toy pirate ship he'd been visiting every day for weeks. The snowflakes danced around them on the busy Christmas shopping street, indifferent to his silent tears. His mother squeezed his shoulder, her eyes reflecting a pain far deeper than her son could understand. The rent was due, the heating bill unpaid, and Christmas dinner would be sparse enough without stretching for toys. Around them, shoppers bustled with bright bags and cheerful faces, their laughter a stark soundtrack to her quiet desperation. The decorated street lamps cast warm halos on everyone, but seemed to miss their little corner of existence. Behind them, a man in a worn peacoat paused, his collar turned up against the wind. Johnny Depp adjusted his scarf, watching unnoticed as the woman knelt beside her son, whispering promises about next year being better. The boy nodded bravely, trying to smile through his disappointment. The famous actor shifted his weight, considering. In his pocket, his fingers closed around his wallet, but this moment called for something more than simple charity. If this moment made you feel something, imagine what's coming next. Hit that like button and stay with us. Subscribe now. The toy store gleamed like a beacon on Maple Street, its windows transformed into magical portals of possibility. Tonight, the centerpiece was an intricate pirate ship, complete with tiny working cannons and hand-painted details that captured the imagination of 6-year-old Ethan Williams. For 3 weeks, he had dragged his mother here after her double shifts at the diner, just to stand in silent admiration of Captain Silver's revenge. Sarah Williams watched her son's shoulders slump as they turned away from the window. The sold sign had appeared this morning, and explaining it to Ethan had broken something in her. She'd been saving tips in a jar since September, but medical bills from Ethan's asthma attack had emptied even that modest hope. Christmas was 2 days away, and all she had for him was a second-hand book and knitted mittens. The street hummed with last-minute shoppers, their faces bright with purpose as they checked final items off their lists. Carols spilled from storefront speakers, and the scent of roasted chestnuts and cinnamon hung in the air. Elsewhere, the scene might read as joyous, but to Sarah, each twinkling light was just another reminder of what she couldn't provide. She tugged gently at Ethan's hand, steering him toward the bus stop, unaware they were being watched. Johnny Depp had slipped into town 2 days ago, seeking refuge from the relentless circus of publicity surrounding his newest film. Disguised in ordinary clothes, with a beard slightly longer than his usual style, and a worn beanie pulled low, he'd reveled in the anonymity of being just another face in the crowd. No autographs, no cameras, no carefully constructed public persona, just a man observing the genuine rhythm of a small town during the holidays. The store owner, Morris Abernathy, emerged from the shop doorway, locking up for the night. He noticed the boy's retreating figure, and something like regret passed across his face. "Hold on there," he called after them, his voice carrying through the cold air. Sarah turned, instinctively pulling Ethan closer to her side, her posture defensive from years of expecting the worst. "I was wondering if you might want to know who purchased the ship," Morris said, his eyes darting briefly to the shadowed figure of Johnny still standing at the corner. "Sometimes, especially at Christmas, arrangements can be made." The man's tone was conspiratorial, softer than his usual business voice. Ethan's head snapped up, hope flaring dangerously in his eyes. Sarah winced, recognizing the cruel kindness of false hope. How many times had life taught her that magic doesn't happen to people like them? Johnny stepped forward then, the yellow glow of the street lamps casting shadows across his partially concealed features. Something about the boy's expression had stirred memories of his own childhood, times when magic seemed possible if you just believed hard enough. He'd spent decades playing characters who lived in worlds of imagination, but here was a child whose entire universe of possibility was being crushed by the mundane reality of economics. "I believe I might be able to help," he said, his voice carrying the distinctive cadence that had narrated countless beloved films. Sarah's eyes narrowed with suspicion, her body language shifting subtly to place herself between this stranger and her son. A protective mother's instinct in a world where kindness rarely came without cost. Morris recognized him instantly, eyes widening in silent acknowledgement, but he maintained his professional composure with nothing more than a slight nod. Around them, oblivious shoppers continued their holiday errands, unaware of the small drama unfolding on the snowy sidewalk. A teenage girl glanced their way, then did a double-take, her hand reaching instinctively for her phone. The moment of anonymity was evaporating quickly. Johnny knew he had perhaps minutes before this quiet scene would transform into something entirely different, before the simple act of human kindness would be captured, distorted, and distributed for public consumption. Things are about to take a turn. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe, like our video, and keep watching. "Mom, it's Jack Sparrow," Ethan whispered, tugging urgently at his mother's coat sleeve. His eyes had grown impossibly wide, the disappointment of moments ago replaced by disbelieving wonder. Around them, the whispers began, spreading like ripples in still water. Phones emerged from pockets, screens illuminating faces in the gathering dusk. Sarah's confusion was genuine. She worked double shifts and night hours. Movies were a luxury she rarely experienced. The name meant little to her, but the growing excitement of the crowd registered as potential danger. "We should go," she murmured, gentle but firm as she tried to guide Ethan away. Morris intervened smoothly. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation inside." The evening's getting colder. He held the shop door open, a sanctuary from the growing spectacle outside. Johnny nodded gratefully, aware of the shifting atmosphere. What had begun as a private moment was rapidly becoming a public event. Inside, the toy store transformed into a universe of wonder. Shelves climbed toward the ceiling, filled with treasures both modern and timeless. The pirate ship sat regally on a display table near the register, its sails catching the warm light from overhead. Ethan gravitated toward it instinctively, though he maintained a respectful distance, hands clasped tightly behind his back as his mother had taught him. "Don't touch what you can't afford to break." "I've seen you here before," Johnny said to the boy, his voice gentle. "You seem to have a particular interest in this vessel." He moved closer to the display, studied the craftsmanship with genuine appreciation. Behind them, Morris discreetly turned the open sign to "closed" and drew the blinds against the curious faces now gathering outside. Sarah stood rigid, protective, uncertain of the famous stranger's intentions toward her son. "It's Captain Silver's ship," Ethan explained seriously, his small voice gaining confidence as he spoke about something he clearly knew well. He was the kindest pirate ever. He stole from bad kings and gave treasure to people who needed food and houses. The boy's imagination had clearly built an entire mythology around the wooden toy. Johnny smiled, crouching down to the boy's level. A pirate with a moral code. Those are the most interesting kind, wouldn't you agree? He glanced up at Sarah, sensing her tension. "I'm Johnny, by the way. Not actually a pirate, despite some roles that might suggest otherwise." "I know who you are," Sarah replied, her voice low and uncertain. "What I don't understand is why you're interested in my son." The protective edge in her tone was unmistakable, a mother who had learned through hard experience that unexpected attention rarely ended well for people in their circumstances. Morris busied himself behind the counter, pretending not to listen while arranging already perfectly aligned gift boxes. Outside, the crowd had swelled considerably, faces pressed against the glass despite the drawn blinds. Someone banged on the door, then another, the sounds growing more insistent. "Mom, people are going to break the window," Ethan observed worriedly, inching closer to the pirate ship as if to protect it. His innocent concern for the store's property rather than the growing spectacle touched something in Johnny. Here was a child who had so little, yet his first thought was for someone else's belongings. "They'll disperse eventually," Johnny said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. He reached toward the ship, running his finger along the miniature railing. "You know, I collect things too. Not pirate ships specifically, but things that tell stories. Items with histories." He glanced at Sarah again, trying to convey without words that his intentions were genuine. "Would you allow Ethan to tell me why this particular ship matters so much to him?" Sarah hesitated, years of hard-earned caution warring with the genuine emotion she saw in the actor's eyes. Something about his manner, not the polished charm of his on-screen personas, but an awkward sincerity, made her relent slightly. She nodded once, a tight movement. "My dad had one just like it," Ethan said, his small fingers hovering inches from the mast without touching. "Before he went to heaven, we used to play pirates every Saturday." He spoke matter-of-factly with the simple acceptance children sometimes have for life's greatest tragedies. "Mom said his ship got lost when we had to move to the apartment." Johnny's eyes met Sarah's over the boy's head. The unspoken story was clear. A widow struggling to keep her family afloat, possessions sold or left behind during harder times. Outside, camera flashes now punctuated the darkness. Phones pressed against the glass as the crowd realized who was inside. Morris looked increasingly nervous, moving to check that the door was securely locked. "It's becoming quite the situation out there," the store owner observed. "Perhaps we should use the back exit. I can arrange for the ship to be delivered wherever you'd like, Mr. Depp." The implication was clear. The famous actor had presumably purchased the toy, and this encounter with the boy was simply a coincidental meeting. Johnny straightened, conflict evident in his expression. "Actually, I haven't bought anything yet." He looked thoughtfully at the ship, then at Ethan, whose hope was visibly fading as he realized the conversation was coming to an end. The boy had already stepped back from the display, resuming his practiced stance of polite resignation. "Mom, we should go," Ethan said quietly. "The bus might come soon, and it's the last one tonight." His small attempt at being practical and grown up was perhaps the most heartbreaking thing of all. Sarah reached for his hand, grateful for his understanding while privately devastated by how early her son had learned to temper his disappointments. Morris cleared his throat awkwardly. "I should mention, the ship actually hasn't been sold yet. There was interest from another collector, but no transaction has been completed." He glanced meaningfully at Johnny, offering an opportunity without directly stating this situation. Comment below, and let's talk. "How much is it?" Johnny asked abruptly, turning to Morris. The store owner named a figure that made Sarah inhale sharply, 3 months of her salary at least. She placed her hands protectively on Ethan's shoulders, already preparing him for another disappointment. "That's quite reasonable for such craftsmanship," Johnny remarked, reaching for his wallet. As he did, the back door of the shop burst open, bringing with it a blast of cold air and the store's teenage assistant, wide-eyed and breathless. "Mr. Abernathy, there's reporters outside now, and the police are coming because people are blocking the street." The teenager froze upon seeing Johnny, his professional composure evaporating instantly. "Oh my God, it's true, you're really him." Outside, the situation had escalated from curious onlookers to a full-scale event. The comfortable anonymity Johnny had been enjoying was completely shattered. Through the gaps in the blinds, camera flashes illuminated the growing crowd like lightning. Sarah instinctively pulled Ethan closer, her expression hardening with concern. "I'm so sorry," Johnny said, genuine regret in his voice. "This isn't what I intended." He looked torn between completing his gesture and protecting the family from unwanted exposure. The last thing Sarah and Ethan needed was to become collateral damage in the relentless machinery of celebrity news. Morris moved quickly, business instincts taking over. "There's a service corridor that leads to the alley behind the building. No one knows about it except delivery people." He pulled a set of keys from his pocket, moving toward a door partially hidden behind a display of stuffed animals. "You can all exit that way while I deal with this situation." Sarah was already collecting their things, preparing for a quick retreat. She'd experienced enough in life to recognize when a situation was spiraling beyond control. "Thank you for your kindness," she said to Johnny, her voice formal but sincere. "Ethan will have a wonderful memory of meeting you." Johnny made a sudden decision. "Morris, I'd like to purchase the ship." He handed over his credit card. "And I'd like it wrapped for immediate collection." His voice had taken on the quiet authority that came from decades of navigating chaotic film sets and public appearances. This wasn't the moment to hesitate. As Morris hurried to process the transaction, Johnny knelt before Ethan again. "Captain Silver sounds like someone worth remembering," he said seriously. "A pirate who understood that treasure isn't always gold and jewels, but sometimes it's making sure people have what they need." Ethan nodded solemnly, understanding flowing between them. Outside, the clamor grew louder as several people discovered the back entrance, their shadows visible through the frosted glass of the service door. Time was running short. Morris returned with the ship now carefully nestled in tissue paper inside a sturdy box, tied with a simple red ribbon. He handed it to Johnny with the receipt and a pen for an autograph. Business and fandom momentarily overcoming his professional detachment. The knocking on the back door began, insistent and rhythmic. Sarah's anxiety was palpable, her eyes darting between her son and the exits, calculating their escape. The teenage assistant stood frozen, torn between excitement at the celebrity encounter and alarm at the growing chaos. Johnny signed the receipt with a flourish, then turned to Ethan. With ceremonial gravity, he extended the wrapped package. "Every ship needs a captain who understands its worth," he said. "I believe Captain Silver would want someone who knows his story to take command." Ethan's expression transformed from confusion to dawning comprehension. His small hands reached tentatively for the box, stopping just short of touching it. "But it's sold," he whispered, the ingrained caution of a child who had learned early about economic boundaries. "It is sold," Johnny agreed. "To me. And now I'm entrusting it to you, Captain Ethan, because you understand its true value." He placed the box gently in the boy's hands, then added in a stage whisper, "Pirates understand that sometimes treasures find their rightful owners through unconventional means." Sarah started to protest, pride and dignity warring with her desire to see her son happy. "We can't accept something so expensive," she began, but Johnny interrupted gently. "Please," he said, his voice dropping to ensure only she could hear. "I have been fortunate beyond measure in my life. Allow me this small moment of genuine connection." There was something vulnerable in his expression, a glimpse of the man behind the celebrity mask, someone who understood that his wealth and status created barriers as often as they opened doors. The pounding on the door grew more urgent. Through the blinds, they could see more phone cameras recording, more faces pressed against the glass. The moment of privacy was evaporating rapidly. "We need to go now," Morris urged, jangling his keys nervously. The teenage assistant was already holding open the corridor door, urgency written across his features. What had begun as a simple act of kindness had transformed into a complicated extraction operation. Ethan clutched the boxed ship to his chest like the treasure it was, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Thank you, Captain Jack," he whispered, too overwhelmed to correct his mixing of fantasy and reality. He reached out suddenly with his free arm, wrapping it around Johnny's neck in a swift, fierce hug that caught the actor by surprise. For a brief moment, Johnny Depp, who had embodied countless characters and received every accolade the entertainment industry could bestow, seemed genuinely moved by this simple, unguarded gesture of gratitude. His carefully maintained public persona slipped, revealing something authentic and surprisingly tender. Sarah's resistance crumbled in the face of her son's joy. "Thank you," she said simply, meeting Johnny's eyes with new understanding. In that moment, the transaction transcended charity or celebrity benevolence. It became something more profound, a recognition of shared humanity despite vastly different circumstances. Morris guided them toward the corridor, whispering hurried directions about which turns to take to reach the alley. Johnny hung back slightly, preparing to create a diversion to ensure their clean escape. He would face the cameras and fans, a role he knew well, while Sarah and Ethan slipped away with their treasure and their privacy intact. It's not over yet. The best part is coming. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. Two days later, on Christmas morning, Ethan sat cross-legged on their apartment floor, Captain Silver's ship commanding the center of their modest living room. He narrated elaborate adventures to his mother, the ship sailing through imaginary storms and discovering uncharted territories on their worn carpet. Sarah watched from the kitchenette, a cup of coffee warming her hands, her eyes bright with a joy she had almost forgotten was possible. The local newspaper lay open on their small table, the headline reading, "Christmas Spirit Alive in Riverdale, Johnny Depp's surprise appearance causes sensation." The article described how the actor had emerged from the toy store to greet fans and sign autographs, deflecting questions about why he was there with characteristic charm. There was no mention of Sarah or Ethan, no invasion of their privacy, just as Johnny had promised when they parted in the back alley. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from Morris. "Just wanted to check that the package arrived home safely." She smiled, typing back her thanks. The store owner had been surprisingly protective, refusing to share any details about the other customers in his shop that night, despite numerous inquiries from both press and curious locals. By some unspoken agreement, neither Sarah nor Ethan had shared the full story with anyone. It remained their private Christmas miracle, unmarred by public scrutiny or social media exposure. In a world where almost everything became content for consumption, they had protected this moment as something sacred and personal. A week later, a small package arrived addressed to Captain Ethan Williams. Inside was a handcrafted miniature treasure chest filled with chocolate coins wrapped in gold foil and a handwritten note on parchment-like paper, for distribution to worthy crew members and civilians in need. Every great captain understands the importance of sharing the wealth. A fellow adventurer. No return address, no signature beyond those words, but the meaning was clear to both of them. Sarah placed the note in her keepsake box alongside her husband's wedding ring and Ethan's first baby tooth. This, too, was a treasure, not because it came from someone famous, but because it represented something increasingly rare: genuine human connection across the boundaries of circumstance and status. Around town, the story had evolved with each retelling. Johnny Depp had come specifically to their town to film a secret project. He was scouting locations for his next movie. He was visiting a childhood friend. He had family connections to the area. The truth, a simple, unplanned act of kindness, seemed too ordinary among the elaborate theories. Yet it was precisely this simplicity that made it meaningful to those actually involved. Morris's toy shop experienced an unprecedented boom in business, with tourists and locals alike coming to see where the famous actor had visited. The store owner leveraged this attention thoughtfully, establishing a Captain's Fund donation jar by the register to help provide toys to children in need. Each time it filled, he thought of Ethan's face that night and felt a quiet satisfaction that one moment of genuine connection continued to create ripples of goodwill. Johnny Depp returned to the structured chaos of his public life, but something had shifted subtly in his perspective. In subsequent interviews, without mentioning specifics, he began speaking more about the moments of human connection that happened away from cameras, the real exchanges that reminded him why he had fallen in love with storytelling in the first place. Sometimes the most important scenes happen when no one's watching, he told a journalist who asked about his creative process. The authentic moments that never make it to screen, those are what inform everything else. His fans analyzed these comments for clues about upcoming roles, unaware he was referring to a small boy's expression when receiving an unexpected treasure. For Ethan, the pirate ship became more than just a toy. It was tangible proof that magic could happen, that stories could step into real life when you least expected it. On difficult days when Sarah worried about bills or when the apartment felt too small, he would run his fingers along the ship's tiny railings and remember the lesson embedded in this experience. Kindness was a choice anyone could make, regardless of their circumstances. Sarah kept the newspaper article in a drawer, taking it out occasionally to remind herself that goodness could appear unexpectedly, even in a world that often seemed indifferent to struggle. The experience hadn't solved their financial challenges or fundamentally changed their daily reality, but it had restored something equally valuable: her belief in possibility. In a culture obsessed with recording and sharing every moment, their unwitnessed Christmas story remained largely untold. A small, perfect treasure guarded not by locks or passwords, but by the shared understanding that some experiences are too genuine to be surrendered to public consumption. And in that privacy, the true magic of their encounter with Johnny Depp remained intact, unsullied by viral fame or fleeting celebrity gossip, a real-life fairy tale whose value lay precisely in its intimate scale and authentic heart. Wow, what a story! If this moved you, imagine what else we have for you. Hit that like button, drop a comment, and let us know what you think.